Hello, friends. Welcome to another tarot deck review. The deck that I have for you today is one that I have very conflicting feelings about. This here is the ASL Tarot, and it's one of my favorite and most disappointing decks. For those who may not be familiar with this abbreviation, ASL stands for American Sign Language. This deck came to life via a Kickstarter campaign by a deaf artist named Dylan. He wanted to bring attention to and also celebrate people with different physical abilities. I was extremely excited when I first found out about this deck. I barely finished reading the description before hitting that pledge button. Not only do I love this concept, I love the artwork. But unfortunately, everything else about this deck leaves a lot to be desired. In this video, I will go over all the things that I like and dislike about this deck, beginning with the qualities that I found to be negative. The first disappointing thing about this deck is the cardstock. This is hands down, without competition, the worst cardstock I have ever seen in my life. I've seen ultra thin cards, cards that curve, and cards that are poorly cut. None of them come even close to competing with this deck for the worst cardstock award. If I had a digital copy of this deck and printed these cards onto the cheapest cardstock I can find on my crappy home computer, it wouldn't look much worse than this deck. This is not an exaggeration. My biggest complaint about this cardstock is that it is unreasonably and unnecessarily thick. In fact, it's so thick that it's more accurate to call it cardboard as opposed to cardstock. Here it is compared to a standard mass market Rider-Waite-Smith deck. As you can see, this deck is nearly twice as thick. Our next comparison is with the Fablemaker's Animated Tarot. As you can see, the thickness of these two decks are essentially the same. With the Fablemaker, however, the thickness of the deck is intentional. This is a special cardstock that incorporates 8 separate images to create the illusion of movement. The ASL Tarot has no special effects. I'm also going to compare this deck to the True Black Tarot, which is also an exceptionally thick deck. While the True Black Tarot doesn't have any special effects per se, the cardstock is incredibly gorgeous with this luxurious matte suede finish. The creator of this deck compares the feel of these cards to rose petals, and I couldn't agree more. I enjoy the feel of these cards the way children like the feel of soft plush dolls. Furthermore, it has a tough, scratch-resistant coating that makes it very water-resistant. It is also exceptionally non-reflective. And here is an example of what I mean. Again, the ASL Tarot doesn't require any special cardstock to achieve. And aside from the ridiculous thickness, this deck is also very poorly cut. You can see just exactly how uneven these edges are. Honestly, I am not the greatest deck modifier, and I have decks trimmed that looks better than this. Here is the drawstring bag that came with this deck. In addition to this bag, this deck was also meant to come with a one-piece box that is designed to look like a book. And in all fairness, it did come with such a box. Unfortunately, I covered it up with scrapbooking paper and used it for another deck, which I've since sold. Why did I do that? Because the box was too shallow for this deck of cards. I suppose an argument can be made that I'm being unreasonably critical by calling this two separate negative qualities. After all, the box was only too shallow because the cards were just way too thick. But I do classify them as two separate demerit points because this is a result of poor planning, design, and quality control. Why would a creator not request proofs to ensure everything looks and feels right before placing a full order for the entire production? In spite of the atrocious cardstock, the worst aspect of this deck was the poor communication during the Kickstarter campaign. I've backed dozens of tarot decks via Kickstarter, and this is the second worst experience I've ever had. with the first being a deck that I no longer expect to receive after nearly 3 years. The delivery date for this deck was significantly delayed. While that's always disappointing, I was prepared for production hiccups. Many creators aren't apt business people. They make mistakes and experience setbacks. Kickstarter is a market created specifically for amateur entrepreneurs, and backers pledge with this full understanding. What was extremely upsetting was the way the creator handled the situation. When the excitement of creating a new deck was outweighed by the stress of it all, he stopped responding. In my opinion, ghosting your customers is one of the most unprofessional things a business person can do. I'd rather receive a sincere apology, honestly explaining that he was in over his head and wasn't sure if the campaign could be fulfilled. Had he been forthcoming and responsive, I would have been much more empathetic. I wanted to review this deck with the negative aspects first so that I can end on a positive note, because there definitely are positives. Ultimately, the reason why I still have positive feelings for this deck is because I really do love the art. Let me start with the card backs. As you can see, the design is black and gold, one of my favorite color sets. I also like the simplicity of the pattern. I also like that it's edged in gold. Even though the poor cardstock takes away from the look, I do still like it quite a bit. And now, turning the deck over, we get to the heart and soul of this deck. The artwork is as beautiful as I hoped it would be. I love these dull, solid colors. I think it gives it this groovy 70s vibe. Aside from the color scheme, something I find fascinating is that these people have no pupils in their eyes, which gives them the appearance of blindness. This is interesting to me because this is a deck about sign language, and one needs sight for that. On the other hand, I feel like the message here is that when we read with tarot, we are seeing with our third eye. But of course, the thing I love most about the art is the embedment of ASL. Now, I can't actually read sign language, but from the visuals, I see that the pip cards only sign the numbers and not the suits. Just to be clear though, this is merely a comment and not a criticism, as I thought it was worth pointing out. I think the beauty and uniqueness of this deck is most demonstrated in cards like the Chariot, Judgment, and the World. As you can see, these figures have more than two arms. Again, I can't actually read sign language, but I'm guessing this is because it takes several motions to create these signs. Then there are cards like Justice. This figure also have more than two arms, but I don't think it's because the sign for justice requires motion. I think the creator wanted to keep the original image of her holding a scale and sword while signing at the same time. This card in particular is one of my favorites in this deck because in Chinese Buddhism, there's a Buddha called the Thousand Armed Buddha, and this figure in particular reminds me of her. But I think my ultimate favorite card in this deck is Strength. I love the black background and this woman's pose. There's a sense of fierceness and fearlessness while maintaining the original essence of grace. So, here are my final thoughts about this deck. While the poor cardstock and artist communication leaves a lot to be desired, the artwork and concept allows me to still love it. Let me conclude this video with a full flip through so that you can see this deck in all its beauty. And at the end of this flip through, if you found this review helpful or entertaining, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to this channel for more tarot related content. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.